Marcus Licinius Crassus is a central figure in the history of the Roman Republic, known for his immense wealth, but at the same time, for his humiliating defeat at the Battle of Carrhae. But how did Crassus become the richest man in Rome? And why was his defeat against the Parthians so humiliating? Stay with me in this video as we see the complete story of this man, who became known as the richest man in Rome. Crassus was born in the year 115 BC into one of the oldest and most prominent families in Rome. The gens Licinia was a patrician family that held great prestige, and Crassus grew up amidst a tradition of power and political influence. His father, Publius Licinius Crassus, was a consul and censor, which guaranteed Crassus an aristocratic education and an early introduction to politics and the power struggles of Rome. While still young, Crassus grew up in a transforming Rome, marked by the struggles between two political factions: the populares, who defended the rights of the plebs and promoted agrarian reforms, and the optimates, who represented the interests of the senatorial aristocracy. This political conflict eventually became one of the most tumultuous periods in the history of the Roman Republic. The civil wars between Marius and Sulla, and this war would directly affect the life of Crassus and his family. In the year 87 BC, when Crassus was approximately 28 years old, this conflict reached its peak with Gaius Marius and his allies taking control of Rome by force. Crassus's father, who supported the rival Optimates faction, was captured and executed during the political purges that followed Marius's victory. His brother was also killed in this process, and the family's properties were confiscated. Forced to flee to save his life, Marcus Licinius Crassus escaped Rome and found refuge in Spain, where his family still owned lands. This period of exile was a moment of crisis and transformation for Crassus. While in Spain, Crassus began to form a network of local allies and to rebuild his fortune. He managed to gather troops and form a power base, taking advantage of the properties his family still possessed in that region. When the general Lucius Cornelius Sulla returned to Italy in the year 83 BC after his voluntary exile, he initiated his march on Rome to retake control of the Republic, and Crassus immediately joined him and his forces. Crassus knew that supporting Sulla, who was determined to crush the followers of Marius, offered the best opportunity for him to restore his social and political position in Rome. Upon returning to the city with Sulla's forces, Crassus recovered his family's properties and began to rebuild his fortune. With Sulla's victory and the consolidation of his power as dictator, a process began that became known as the proscriptions, a list of political enemies who were declared traitors and had their properties confiscated. Sulla used the proscriptions as a way to eliminate his opponents and reward his allies, and Crassus was one of the main beneficiaries of this process. During the proscriptions, he seized the opportunity to increase his fortune significantly. Crassus bought the confiscated properties of the proscribed at extremely low prices, and in many cases acquired entire buildings, especially in Rome, enormously increasing his patrimony. Through this strategy, Crassus became one of the wealthiest men in Rome. The alliance with Sulla not only provided him with a promising military career, but also placed him in a position of vast economic power. Furthermore, Crassus implemented a peculiar method of making money with a fire brigade that he created himself. When a fire started in Rome, he would send his men to negotiate the purchase of the threatened properties. If the owners sold the building, Crassus would put out the fire, but if they refused, he would let the building burn. In the year 72 BC, the slave revolt led by Spartacus began to grow in size and strength. At this moment, the Roman Senate became desperate for a solution. By this point, Spartacus and his followers had defeated several Roman legions and were moving toward northern Italy with plans to cross the Alps and flee the peninsula. It was at this point that the Senate appointed Crassus as supreme commander of the campaign against the rebels. Crassus, who already had a reputation for cunning and military discipline, accepted the challenge. Aware that a victory over Spartacus could consolidate his political position, he assumed command of about 40,000 soldiers reorganizing his legions and imposing severe discipline. Crassus was known for his brutal tactics, and one of his first measures was to revive the practice of decimation, an ancient disciplinary method in which 1 in every 10 soldiers of a unit that deserted or showed cowardice was executed. This measure, although unpopular, restored discipline among his troops, who were shaken by previous defeats. After this, Crassus adopted a meticulous and cautious approach. He knew that Spartacus was a cunning leader, and that direct confrontation without proper planning could result in another humiliating defeat. Instead, Crassus decided to surround the rebel army and cut them off from their supplies. While Spartacus and his followers decided to retreat to southern Italy, Crassus built a line of fortifications, a kind of wall along the Isthmus of Calabria, blocking the slaves' path to the north and trapping them in the region. Spartacus tried to break through Crassus's defenses on several occasions, but his attempts failed, and hunger began to weaken the rebel forces. Over time, the rebels fragmented, and while some tried to flee, Spartacus gathered the remaining ones for a last confrontation with Crassus. In the year 71 BC, the decisive battle occurred near the Salarius River in southern Italy. Although Spartacus fought bravely and led his men on the front lines, the rebel army was completely destroyed by the Roman legions. Spartacus was killed in combat, although his body was never found. After the victory over Spartacus, Crassus decided to send a clear message to anyone who thought of defying his authority again. He ordered the crucifixion of about 6,000 surviving slaves along the Appian Way, the main road linking Rome to southern Italy. After the overwhelming victory over Spartacus and his consecration as one of the richest and most influential men in Rome, Crassus faced a new challenge, competing politically with the other giants of the Republic. One of Crassus's greatest rivals was Pompey the Great, who at the time was consul alongside him in the year 70 BC. The two, even being consuls, had very different visions and personalities. Crassus was less popular among the soldiers and the Roman people than Pompey, who had great military prestige due to his victories in campaigns against the pirates and in Spain. This difference in popularity created a competition between the two, even when they had to share political power. Despite this rivalry, Crassus realized that he would need strategic alliances to remain relevant. Julius Caesar at the time was a young politician emerging as a growing force in Rome. Caesar was returning from his campaigns in Spain and possessed both the charisma and the popular support that Crassus and Pompey needed for their own interests. But of course, Caesar also knew he would need Crassus's financial support and also Pompey's military influence to achieve his political goals. Thus, in the year 60 BC, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar formed an informal agreement that later became known as the First Triumvirate. This political pact was not made official by the Senate, but operated as an alliance of convenience between the three leaders, allowing them to manipulate political decisions in Rome. Crassus financed many of Caesar's political activities, while Pompey offered his military support. Caesar, in exchange, used his power of persuasion and charisma to ensure that the interests of Crassus and Pompey were met in the Senate. For Crassus, the First Triumvirate represented an opportunity to protect and expand his influence. The alliance provided him with the necessary support to ensure that his economic and political agenda was executed despite the opposition of the Senate. One of Crassus's most significant achievements in this period was the renegotiation of tax contracts for the eastern provinces, something that brought direct benefits to his vast fortune. Crassus had large investments in tax collection companies, and securing more favorable conditions for these companies was a personal and economic victory. Furthermore, the support of Caesar and Pompey offered Crassus a certain balance against the optimates in the Senate, who still distrusted his ambitions. Despite not having the same military prestige as Pompey or the charisma of Caesar, Crassus used his wealth and political influence to ensure his opinions were heard and respected. An example of this occurred when, in 59 BC, Caesar was elected consul. During his term, he passed a series of agrarian and economic reforms that favored both Crassus and Pompey. These legislative acts favored the Triumvirate and further cemented the control of the three over the Roman political apparatus. However, despite being a powerful alliance, the Triumvirate began to show signs of tension. Crassus and Pompey, although temporarily united, never completely overcame their rivalry. Pompey had great military prestige and was widely popular among the people, while Crassus was always seen as the financier of the alliance, without the same military glories as his partners. Furthermore, the growing power of Julius Caesar began to threaten the position of the two within the alliance. In the year 56 BC, the three leaders met in the city of Lucca to renegotiate their alliance. In this meeting, Crassus and Pompey secured a new term as consuls for the year 55 BC. Caesar, in turn, had the command of his campaigns in Gaul prolonged, which allowed him to further consolidate his military power. But even having accumulated a great fortune and established a powerful political alliance, Crassus always resented his lack of military glories comparable to those of Caesar and Pompey. He yearned for a great military victory that could rival the achievements of his allies, and this led him to undertake an ambitious and at the same time disastrous campaign against the Parthian Empire. The Parthian Empire at that moment was a rich and influential Eastern power and was seen as an attractive target, both for the prestige a victory against them would bring and for the riches that could be looted. Crassus believed that a victory over the Parthians would consolidate his position as one of Rome's greatest military leaders and balance his rivalry with Pompey and Caesar. However, from the beginning, this campaign was viewed with suspicion by many in Rome. Crassus had a long history of ambition for wealth, and many of his contemporaries considered the campaign to be motivated more by his greed than by a genuine interest in Rome's strategic objectives. Cicero himself, who was one of the great orators and senators of the Republic, went so far as to openly criticize Crassus, stating that his search for glory and wealth blinded him to the dangers of a war with the Parthians, an enemy that was highly capable and possessed military tactics that were unknown to the Romans. But this was not enough to stop Crassus. In the year 55 BC, he was appointed governor of the province of Syria, and this served as the base for his campaign against Parthia. From there, he gathered an army of 7 legions, totaling about 50,000 soldiers, including a large contingent of Gallic cavalry and auxiliaries. Crassus, trusting in his numerical superiority and the discipline of the Roman legions, set out toward Parthian territory with confidence, believing that his forces would prevail over the eastern armies. However, Crassus underestimated the enemy. While he marched east, the Parthian king Orodes II prepared his defenses and, more importantly, mobilized an army under the command of General Surena, a skilled military leader who would use innovative and decisive tactics against the Romans. When Crassus crossed the Euphrates River, he encountered the Parthian army, which, although numerically inferior, possessed 2 great advantages. First, the heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, protected by armor, and second, the mounted archers who mastered the technique of shooting arrows while riding, retreating at high speed. This combination proved to be devastating against Crassus's legions. General Surena, knowing Roman battle tactics and taking advantage of the desert terrain, used a strategy of mobile warfare. The Parthian archers, mounted on fast horses, launched an incessant rain of arrows upon the Roman legions, always keeping out of reach of the Roman infantry formations. The cataphracts, in turn, carried out devastating charges against the Roman formations, destroying their cohesion. Crassus, faced with this combat tactic unknown to the Romans, failed to adapt his forces to face the enemy. The Roman army was cornered, and the soldiers, exhausted and without supplies, began to fall into disorder. With every attempt to advance, the Romans were massacred by the Parthian archers, who continued to attack from afar without giving a chance for a response. During the battle, Crassus's son, Publius Licinius Crassus, who commanded the Roman cavalry, attempted a desperate charge to break the enemy lines. However, he and his unit were surrounded and annihilated. The death of Publius was a devastating blow to Crassus, both emotionally and militarily. the morale of the Roman army crumbled rapidly, and the surrounded legions, with no way out, were decimated. Of the 50,000 Roman soldiers, more than 30,000 were killed or captured. After the catastrophic defeat at Carrhae, Crassus tried to negotiate an agreement with Sulla to save what remained of his army. However, during the negotiations, he was betrayed and assassinated by the Parthians. According to some historical sources, such as the historian Plutarch, the Parthians mocked Crassus after his death by pouring molten gold into his mouth, symbolizing his insatiable greed for wealth that had led to his destruction. The death of Crassus at Carrhae had profound repercussions for Roman politics. The First Triumvirate, which until then was kept in balance by Crassus's power, began to crumble. Without Crassus to mediate the rivalry between Caesar and Pompey, the tension between the two increased exponentially. While Caesar consolidated his power in Gaul, Pompey was named the sole consul in Rome, increasing control over the institutions of the Republic. Above all, the death of Crassus was a humiliating blow to Rome. It not only lost thousands of soldiers, but also caused a great shock to the prestige of the empire, which until then believed in the invincibility of its legions. The Parthian campaign, which should have brought the glory and wealth that Crassus wanted so much, ended up becoming one of the bitterest and most shameful defeats in Roman military history. So if you enjoyed knowing more about the history and the tragic end of Crassus, I will leave another video suggestion here on the side for you to watch. So don't forget, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.